The moon over the ancient Mediterranean was never merely a celestial body. It was a cold, watchful eye, illuminating a landscape where the boundary between the living and the spectral remained perpetually thin. In the silent stretches of the Thracian wilderness, or the desolate crossroads of Attica, the traveler's greatest fear was not the prowling wolf or the desperate brigand. It was something far more transient, yet far more predatory. Imagine a figure emerging from the long shadows, a woman of ethereal, haunting beauty, her presence a silent invitation. But as the torchlight flickers, the illusion falters. One leg is crafted of polished bronze, the other a grotesque limb of an ass. This is the Empusa. She is not a creature of simple folklore, but a manifestation of the anxieties that have haunted the human psyche since the dawn of civilization. She represents the intersection of desire and destruction, the point where the physical world is breached by the primordial chaos of the underworld. To speak of the Empusa is to speak of the shadows that reside within us all, the hunger that cannot be satiated, and the masks we wear to hide our more monstrous inclinations. Today, we move beyond the Olympian heights and the heroic cycles to examine a figure that exists in the periphery, a specter that haunts the liminal spaces of the ancient world. The Empusa is often relegated to the status of a mere bogeyman used to frighten children into obedience, or a comedic foil in the satyr plays of antiquity. However, such a reduction ignores the profound philosophical and psychological weight she carries. As a shape-shifting daughter of Hecate, the Empusa serves as a bridge between the chthonic realm and the surface world. She is a succubus only in the most superficial sense. In truth, she is a predator of the soul, a reminder that in the Greek worldview, the supernatural was rarely benevolent and never predictable.
Unveil the legends.
If the origin of Sparta was a convergence of iron and myth, its continued existence was a masterclass in the psychological architecture of control. To the contemporary observer, the Spartan army appears as a pinnacle of tactical evolution, the hoplite phalanx perfected. Yet, if we move beyond the tactical geometry of shield and spear, we find that the true actions of the Spartan state were not directed at foreign empires, but at the internal landscape of the human mind. Every myth they cultivated, every ritual they performed, and every blood-soaked tradition they maintained was a calculated maneuver designed to project an aura of inevitable, divine doom. Central to this psychological machinery was the agoge, the state-run educational crucible that transformed children into instruments of the state. While other Greek polis viewed education as the cultivation of the paideia, the development of the well-rounded citizen capable of rhetoric, music, and philosophy, Sparta viewed the child as raw material for a weapon. At the age of 7, the Spartan boy was severed from the domestic sphere. The maternal bond, the first and most fundamental human connection, was sacrificed at the altar of the polis. This was not merely a military academy, it was a systematic breaking of the individual spirit. The boys were organized into agalai, or herds, a linguistic choice that strips the youth of their humanity before the training even begins. They were kept in a state of perpetual, manufactured scarcity, clothed in a single rough cloak regardless of the season, and fed rations that were intentionally insufficient. They were forced into a life of predatory cunning. They were encouraged to steal to supplement their hunger, yet if they were caught, they were whipped not for the theft, but for the incompetence of being discovered. This created a generation of men for whom morality was subordinate to efficiency, and for whom the only sin was the failure of the mask. However, the most chilling manifestation of Spartan influence was the crypteia. Often sanitized in modern retellings as a mere survival exercise, a deeper analysis reveals it as a sophisticated system of state-sponsored terrorism. Every year, the ephors, the overseers of the Spartan state, would formally declare war on the Helot population. This was a legal fiction that allowed any Spartan to kill a slave without the spiritual taint of blood guilt. The young men of the Crypteia were sent into the Messenian countryside, hidden by day and hunting by night. They did not target the weak, they targeted the leaders. They assassinated the helots who showed too much strength, too much intelligence, or too much charisma. This was the darker trait of the Spartan warrior. He was, first and foremost, a high-functioning instrument of domestic policing. The Crypteia served a dual purpose. It blooded the young Spartans, forcing them to cross the moral threshold into homicide, while simultaneously decapitating the social structure of the enslaved majority. It was a political maneuver that turned the geography of Laconia into a panopticon, a place where the slave never knew if the shadow in the brush was a predator or merely the wind. The Spartan didn't just rule through strength, he ruled. This psychological posture was most visible on the battlefield, through the medium of the aspis, or the heavy bronze shield. In the Homeric age, the shield was a personal tool for the hero to win individual glory. In Sparta, the shield was a social contract. To lose one's helmet was a personal misfortune. To lose one's shield was a betrayal of the cosmos. The shield did not protect the man who carried it. It protected the man to his left. This tactical interdependence meant that the hero was a concept that had to be systematically executed. There was no room for the vanity of an Achilles or the cunning of an Odysseus. There was only the wall, a singular bronze-scaled organism that moved with the terrifying, rhythmic trill of the flute. The choice of music, the pipe and the flute, over the chaotic war cries of other Greek armies was perhaps their most effective psychological maneuver. When the Spartan line advanced, they did so in a chilling, measured silence. This signaled to their enemies that they were facing a force that had achieved a state of total collective synchronization. It suggested a lack of fear that was deeply unnatural. While other men screamed to drown out their terror, the Spartan marched in the quiet of the grave. Yet we must ask, what does it do to the soul of a people to spend every waking hour performing a myth? This level of influence required a constant, exhausting vigilance. The Spartan was never allowed to be off stage. Whether he was eating in the Syssidia or exercising in the gymnasium, he was under the scrutiny of his peers and his elders. The unbreakable shield was a heavy burden, not just for the arm, but for the mind. They had convinced the world of their invincibility, but in doing so, they had become prisoners of their own reputation. They could never admit to weakness, they could never retreat, and they could never evolve. They had become the most feared warriors in the world, but they had paid for that fear by hollowing out the interior life of their citizens. They were masters of the external world, commanders of the battlefield, and architects of a system that could endure for centuries. But once a society decides that its primary purpose is the suppression of its own humanity and the terrorization of its neighbors, it begins a slow descent into a profound spiritual isolation. The Spartan system was a machine designed to prevent change, but the world is fundamentally transient. By attempting to become a statue, Sparta ensured that it could only interact with the world through force. But once that power is secured and the enemy is cowed, the machine does not stop. It begins to grind against its own gears, seeking a purpose in a world that is already beginning to move past the age of iron and blood. Its own gears, seeking... The majesty of the Spartan state lay not in its architecture of stone, which was famously meager, but in its architecture of law, an invisible, interlocking system of controls that sought to solve the most volatile problem in human history, the instability of the soul. While the rival polis of the Greek world experimented with the flickering fires of democracy, or the singular, often erratic, light of tyranny, Sparta constructed a political engine of such profound complexity that it became a self-sustaining organism. This was the Great Retra, a constitution not merely designed to govern, but to automate the human experience, ensuring that no single man could rise above the state and no single citizen could fall below his duty. At the apex of this hierarchy sat the dual kingship, a structural anomaly that reflected the Spartan obsession with equilibrium and their inherent distrust of individual ego. By maintaining two monarchs, one from the Aegead line and one from the Eurypontid line, Sparta institutionalized a state of permanent tension. These were not kings in the Homeric sense, absolute rulers who commanded by the strength of their own charisma. They were hereditary generals, men who possessed the blood of Heracles but were nonetheless bound by a cage of surveillance. The duality was a philosophical statement. In Sparta, even the divine bloodline was divided against itself to prevent the rise of a tyrant. If one king sought to aggrandize his own name, the other stood as a silent, legally mandated check. They were the high priests of the state, the bridge between the mortal realm and the Olympian will, yet they were forced to live under a scrutiny that would have been intolerable to any other monarch in history. Every month, the kings and the ephors exchanged oaths, the kings swearing to rule according to the laws, and the ephors swearing to maintain the kingship so long as those laws were observed. It was a fragile, calculated peace, a reminder that in the eyes of the Spartan system, the person was merely a transient vessel for a permanent office. However, the true masters of this machine were not the kings, but the 5 ephors, magistrates elected annually from the entire body of Spartan citizens. If the kings represented the ancestral past, the ephors represented the unyielding present. Their power was absolute and terrifying. They possessed the legal authority to arrest a king, to fine a general, and to supervise the moral conduct of every citizen. Their existence ensured that the Spartan state remained a panopticon. Because they were while modern vernacular often labels the Empusa as a succubus, the term is somewhat reductive when applied to the complexities of Greek chthonic belief. To the ancients, she was not merely a demon of lust, but a manifestation of uncontrollable hunger. Her predatory nature was seen as an elemental force, as indifferent and inevitable as a storm or the changing of the seasons. She sought the vital fluids of the young, specifically their blood and seed, not for pleasure in the human sense, but to sustain her own ghostly, tenuous existence. In this light, the Empusa represents the leech of potential. By targeting young men before they could fulfill their roles as citizens, soldiers, or fathers, she threatened the very continuity of the polis. She is uncontrollable because she exists outside the social contract. She cannot be reasoned with, bribed, or satiated. Her hunger is a void that reflects the Greek anxiety regarding the waste of life. Unlike the Furies, who were bound by the laws of vengeance and justice, or the gods who could be appeased through sacrifice, the Empusa operates on the whims of a predator. This predatory sexuality was viewed as a perversion of the natural order. In the Greek mind, sex was ideally a generative act, a means of tying the past to the future through lineage. The Empusa inverts this. She uses the biological drive for connection to lead the individual toward extinction. She is the embodiment of the Thanatos drive, the dark urge toward self-destruction that hides behind the eros of life. To be taken by the Empusa was not just to die, but to be erased, consumed by a hunger that left no legacy, only a drained husk in a roadside ditch. This highlights a recurring theme in Hellenic folklore, that the greatest threats to civilization are those that mimic its joys only to hollow them out from the inside. She is the shadow of the banquet, the silence at the heart of the festival. She reminds the Greek citizen that even in the height of life's vitality, the gulping one is waiting. The Empusa's status as an uncontrollable entity also serves as a warning against the hubris of the individual. To believe one could master such a force through sheer will or desire was a fatal mistake. She is the reminder that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed, and some hungers are not meant to be fed. She is the predator that feeds on those who think they are the hunters. In the end, her succubus nature is a metaphor for any obsession that consumes the soul, leaving the body a mere shell. It is one of the more striking ironies of classical literature that our most detailed and vivid encounter with the Empusa occurs not in the somber, blood-stained verses of a tragedy or the chilling warnings found in a mystery cult's initiation, but upon the comic stage of the Lamia festival in 405 BCE. In Aristophanes' masterpiece, The Frogs, we are presented with a version of the Empusa that is simultaneously ridiculous and deeply unsettling, a duality that reflects the Greek comfort with finding the macabre within the mundane. As Dionysus, the god of theater, wine, and religious ecstasy, descends into the bowels of the underworld to retrieve the soul of the playwright Euripides, he is accompanied by his pragmatic, sharp-tongued slave, Xanthias. In the suffocating darkness of the transition between worlds, the Empusa appears. Xanthias, acting as the eyes for a cowering Dionysus, describes the creature's rapid, nauseating transformations. One moment she is a massive, snorting bull, then a mule of burden, then a woman of radiant, intoxicating beauty, and finally, a snarling dog. While the context is satirical, designed specifically to mock the cowardice of a god who has forgotten his own chthonic origins, the psychological undertone remains profoundly somber. Aristophanes uses the Empusa to highlight the absolute instability of human perception. Dionysus, whose own cult is centered on the blurring of boundaries and the ecstasy of shedding one's identity, is reduced to a trembling wreck by a phantom that refuses to hold a single shape. This suggests that the true power of the Empusa lies not in her physical attributes, the claws, the fire, or the bronze, but in her ability to dissolve the observer's sense of reality. She is the personification of gnosis turned inward. She is the knowledge that the world is not stable. In the theater, she is a source of laughter, yet that laughter is a vital defense mechanism, a collective shield for the Athenian audience against the very real dread of the unseen. By placing her in a comedy, Aristophanes does not diminish her. He acknowledges her as a permanent, albeit shifting, fixture of the Greek subconscious. She is the ultimate other, the entity that mocks the protagonist's identity by constantly resetting its own. To see the Empusa is to see the death of form, the terrifying possibility that nothing in this world, not even the gods, is as solid as it seems. In the ancient mind, the geography of the world was punctuated by thin places, and none were more spiritually charged or more feared than the crossroads. To the Greeks, the Triados, the place where three paths meet, was the sacred and terrible domain of Hecate and, by extension, her spectral brood. Philosophically, the crossroads represent the moment of decision, the agonizing intersection of fate and free will. It is here, in the moment of hesitation, that the Empusa strikes. She is the guardian of the wrong choice. In a society that valued the straight path of the citizen, the via recta, the crossroads were seen as points of profound vulnerability. They were often sites of purification rituals where the oxymel, or Hecate's suppers, were left to appease the goddess of the night, and where the pollution, or miasma of the city, was ritually discarded. This made the crossroads areas where the veil between the mundane world and the chthonic depths was dangerously porous. The Empusa haunts these locations because they are inherently transient. No one lives at a crossroads, one only passes through them. By claiming this territory, she asserts dominance over the traveler's journey, transforming a path of progress into a labyrinth of stagnation. She waits at the precise juncture where the light of the city, the fire of the hearth, and the law of the assembly fades into the long shadows of the wilderness. This placement is a deliberate symbolic choice by the mythmakers. It reinforces the idea that the Empusa is a creature of the between, neither fully dead nor truly alive, neither animal nor human, neither goddess nor beast. To encounter her at the crossroads is to face the inherent instability of one's own path. She is the personification of the existential wrong turn, a reminder that the journey of life is not a guaranteed ascent, but a trek constantly shadowed by the potential for a sudden, monstrous derailment into the void. In this sense, the crossroads are not just physical locations, but psychological states. Whenever a person finds themselves between identities, between choices, or between moralities, the Empusa is there, offering a beauty that leads to the grave. In the shadowed gallery of Hellenic folklore, the Empusa does not stand in isolation. She is a vital member of a dark triad, her name often whispered in the same breath as Lamia and Mormo. To the casual observer or the modern reader, these figures might appear as interchangeable relics of a primitive past, mere nursery bogies used to enforce discipline in children through the medium of fear. However, a deeper, more analytical descent into their mythology reveals a distinct and terrifying genealogy of grief, hunger, and the subversion of the feminine. Consider first the figure of Lamia. Unlike the elemental Empusa, Lamia's horror is rooted in a specific, heart-wrenching tragedy. Once a queen of Libya of such exquisite beauty that she ignited the lust of Zeus and the subsequent scorched earth jealousy of Hera, Lamia was driven to madness after Hera slaughtered her children. In her grief, her form became twisted. She became a creature that devoured the children of others, a monster defined by a maternal void that can never be filled. Her horror is a manifestation of historical trauma, the corruption of the mother figure into the predator. Mormo, similarly, serves as a specter of the nursery, often described as a biting phantom or a vengeful spirit. Yet, where Lamia is defined by her history and Mormo by her social function as a bringer of nightmares, the Empusa remains unique in her status as a pure phasma. She lacks the tragic backstory of the fallen queen. She has no human core that was corrupted. She is an elemental void, a chthonic eruption. Together, these entities form what we might call the feminine grotesque in the Greek mind. They represent the various ways the life force can be perverted. Lamia is the corruption of motherhood. Mormo is the corruption of discipline, and the Empusa is the corruption of desire. They are the jello, the strix, the undead influences that lurk in the periphery of the hearth. By grouping them, the ancients were not simply cataloging monsters. They were mapping the diverse territories of the irrational. They created a taxonomy for the things that go bump in the night, shadows that are separate in name and origin, but identical in their intent to drain the vitality of the living. To study one is to eventually encounter the others, for they all drink from the same well of existential dread that lies beneath the surface of civilization. In our modern attempt to categorize the Empusa, we often fall into the trap of anachronism, viewing her through the distorted lens of later mythologies. She is frequently labeled the Greek vampire or the original succubus, but these labels carry the heavy, often distracting baggage of Victorian Gothicism and medieval Christian demonology. To call her a vampire is to imply a quasi-biological necessity for blood, a condition of the undead that follows specific rules: the avoidance of garlic, the vulnerability to sunlight, the need for a coffin. But the Empusa is far more fluid and far less predictable. She is not bound by the physical rules of a Bram Stoker novel. She is an apparition of the soul's anxiety. Her blood drinking is not a metabolic requirement, but a symbolic act, the consumption of psyche, the life breath. Furthermore, the succubus label often shifts the focus toward a purely moral or erotic transgression. In the medieval context, a succubus was a tool of the devil, a fallen angel meant to tempt the pious into sin to claim their souls for hell. The Empusa, however, operates within a polytheistic framework where sin as a concept of eternal damnation did not exist in the same way. She is not a moral agent of a higher evil. She is a chthonic predator. She does not care for your soul's salvation or your moral standing. She seeks the total dissolution of your physical and mental integrity. She is an environmental hazard of the spiritual world. Another common misconception is the idea that she can be simply defeated or slain in the heroic tradition. While legends suggest one could drive her away with a well-placed insult, which supposedly caused her to shriek and vanish, or specific protective charms blessed by Hecate, she is never truly destroyed. You cannot kill the Empusa any more than you can kill the night itself. She is a manifestation of a permanent state of the universe. This distinction is crucial for the modern viewer to understand. She is not a monster to be conquered by a sword-wielding hero, but a reality of the human condition to be endured. She represents the persistent reminder that the world contains forces that are fundamentally indifferent to human morality and immune to human violence. She is the shadow that returns every time the sun goes down, regardless of how many times she was driven away the night before. The Empusa serves as the ultimate mirror for the Greek psyche, a reflection of the inherent danger in beauty, the instability of the self, and the terrifying hunger of the void. By looking at her, we see not just a monster, but the dark undercurrent of a civilization that was obsessed with light, order, and the preservation of the soul. As we draw our gaze back from the desolate crossroads of antiquity, we are left with a figure that remains stubbornly resistant to the light of modern reason. The Empusa is more than a relic of a superstitious age. She is a philosophical meditation on the nature of the hidden. We like to believe that we have mapped the world, that our sciences and our structures have banished the chthonic terrors of the past to the pages of dusty manuscripts. Yet, the Empusa persists in the gaps of our understanding, in the moments when our desires betray our logic and when the masks we present to the world begin to crack. She reminds us that the human experience is inherently liminal. We exist at a perpetual crossroads between our civilized aspirations and our primordial instincts. The Empusa does not just wait in the dark, she waits in the transient spaces of our own character. She is the embodiment of the truth that beauty can be a machination, and that hunger, when detached from purpose, becomes a force of pure destruction. In the end, the Greeks did not tell stories of the Empusa to explain the unknown, but to acknowledge it. They understood that the universe possesses a side that is fundamentally incompatible with human comfort, a side that is shifting, predatory, and immutable. Perhaps the true terror is not the creature with the bronze leg and the flaming hair, but the realization that the boundary between the man and the monster is as fragile as a flickering torch at midnight. As you step into the night, consider the shadows that follow you. Are they merely the absence of light, or are they something older, waiting for the moment you lose your way at the crossroads? Thank you for watching.